I want to change people's perception of generosity. We think that it's a generous act to discount our work, but I would say it's actually more generous to charge appropriately so that you can, in the process, go absolutely above and beyond and all out and absolutely make their day. That is a more generous act, because then you are on the line to do that, because you can kind of say, oh, well, what were they expecting? They weren't paying that much. I didn't have to bring my full, amazingness. And so I just kind of say, no, you got to charge more so that you can do more.
This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. Welcome to part 2 of this pricing series with Joanie Simon. If you have skipped part 1 and you're directly coming to part 2, make sure that you go back to part 1 because you don't want to miss any bit of this good stuff with Joanie Simon. Joanie is a food stylist. She is a published author. She's a food photographer based in Phoenix, Arizona. And I think she's a master at commercial food photography, and she's dropping truth bombs, value bombs about pricing in food photography. This is going to be another superb episode where Joanie is going to share so much more information about how to level up your pricing, how to increase your rates, how to talk to clients, and, maybe a little bit about numbers. So we'll see how that goes. But let's get started with part 2 of our conversation with Joanie Simon. So, Joanie, I want to talk about something interesting, and it's been on my mind. I've been waiting for this moment to talk to you about it. It's about an email that you sent out last month, and it's about the estimate that changed everything. And the reason I want you to tell us that story is because many times we don't understand whether we are undercharging or we are overcharging. We're sending out a quote and we're like, oh my God, I don't know what this is. Am I bidding low or high? Am I going to get the job? Am I not? So kind of the moral of the story is that, if you can leave us with what are the indicators to look out for, whether you're overcharging or undercharging, how do you get to know that? But start us with that amazing story, please.
Yeah. So this was interesting. I'm trying to remember exactly the timing, but I was brought into this opportunity. It was an international hospitality brand. This happened COVID, now that I'm thinking of it. So not all that long ago. And I had made this connection with this chef many moons before that, and he'd gone on to climb the ranks. And this is why I'm like, networking pays dividends in the long run. So somebody who had been a lower level restaurant chef had suddenly risen the ranks to this international hospitality company, and they needed photos. So he had reached out, and, we had the discovery call, and I put together the numbers based on, I can't remember exactly the number of shots that they needed, but it was about a day's worth of time. Mm-hmm. And he was going to be coming and shooting with me. And so I put together my numbers, and I was like, okay, Joanie, it's time. We've continued to raise the prices. I mean, I was beyond sort of the $200, $300 shoots, but I was like, I'm going to put $3,000 on this, or, whatever that first estimate was. I was like, I'm going to just be wild and do that. But then there was this little shredded out in me that was like, you know what? I should ask. Let's just ask my contact. So I texted my friend and I was like, hey, by the way, do you have a sense of what their budget is for this? Because I had met with him and then also somebody from the marketing team, and he said, oh yeah, as long as it's like within 6 to 7K. And I was like, 6 to 7K for a day's worth of photography? What the heck? And this is without an assistant, no stylist. Like, are you out of your gourd? But I was like, okay. And so I put like, $6,800, and I was like, let's just see what happens. And I sent it and they're like, cool, thanks. I was like, great. Oh my gosh. And then I'm like, holy crap, now I'm going to do this. But just like any normal shoot, there wasn't any sort of like weird extra expectations. Cause I think that like we have, again, it's coming back to that conversation. It's like, it's not about me putting in excess amounts of time. It's not about me creating, because the images too that we created for that are probably some of the most boring images of, like, they're just on white and they're breakfast burritos and like muffins. They're not earth-shattering, Insta-worthy, but they're very valuable to them because of where they were planning to use it, how they were planning to use it, and how widely they were distributing that throughout all these other locations. And so that to me was just like this massive eye-opener of, I have been undercharging because I have been personally tying my own value to these images as opposed to the client's value to these images. And also a reminder as to why we always in that call ask, do you have a budget for this photo shoot? Then they may not tell you, but if they do, man, that's so much more helpful. And I'll tell you, people say, oh, well, clients will never tell you. I was like, well, I don't know who you're talking to, but out of the last 10 opportunities I've had, 8 have told me, and not like a specific dollar number, but a range. And that's just so much more helpful because then we know like where are we aiming for. And so, that specific conversation just really changed the game for me. And I was like, I had no idea. Cause that's the other thing too, is you think about an international like hotel chain, what kind of revenue are they generating? We are talking millions, possibly billions of dollars. And so your $6,700 estimate is like not a big deal. We need to sort of like recalibrate our understanding of what pricing looks like in a commercial sense, because it's not the same that, I wouldn't pay $6,700 for those photos, but it's worth it to them. I think the things to look for is, just first of all, it's having that budget conversation and being, again, just transparent, saying, hey, this is going to really help me out. And I think you can kind of appeal to the side of like, are we going to go top of the line with this? Like, are we looking to go all out? Because like every opportunity, every project I do is custom and we can really blow the lid off this. Or are you looking to keep this more budget friendly? Is there, where are we going to land? And getting at least a sense of those boundaries, because then that's going to help you, again, land within that territory.
Wow. And I think it really comes back to the whole point of knowing who you are working with and where are they going to use the images. That's absolutely key to understanding whether you're overcharging, you're over the mark, you're under the mark. I think that's really key. But boy, I love that story. When I read it the first time, it just blew my mind. Oh, wow. Talk about being far off.
So
right?
Far off.
And it's more
my
often.
Initial estimate, I thought I was like already shooting the moon, and I was still at like 50% of what they were willing to pay. I was like, oh my, I'm leaving so much money on the table.
But Joanie, I would also say that, it was kind of in your favor because you had that contact and you could ask them and they gave you a pretty good, like a pretty close estimate, right? It's not always like that. And, so I guess we learn with time, we learn to look out for those indicators as we move forward in the journey, right? Tell me.
I think it's asking the question, because the other thing is too, I think too many times we assume never assume what's in somebody's pocketbook, right? Because I think just as like life advice, the people who are all dolled up and dressed to the nines and super fancy and driving the Maseratis and things, maybe they're loaded, but there's plenty of those folks who it's just all for show. And the people who are like the real ballers are not looking all that fancy, right? And so it's like, you could just never judge a book by its cover is what I'm saying, because there are, people say, oh, well, food bloggers don't pay anything for food photography. And I'm like, well, I'm sure there's some food bloggers who don't pay much for food photography, but there's definitely some who have very healthy budgets that's on par with, so it's like, just never assume, because there's not really a set like obvious marker, but I think that definitely don't be afraid to push into those higher numbers, because again, we're talking about creating images for businesses, and they are going to be making money off the use of those images as opposed to hanging them on their walls for personal enjoyment, right? This is a money making tool, just like they have to pay for software and they have to pay for advertising and they have to pay for all these other things. They've got to pay for photography as well.
Right. It's the value that they see of those photos. And you're so right, because I think I've almost never had a small business come and try to negotiate with me on my prices. But I mostly had the bigger businesses come and say, oh, but we work with this photographer. Oh, but this is that. There's always that sense. I feel like the smaller businesses, like, again, we assume that, they may not have the pockets, but they do, because they value the purpose that that photo is going to solve for them. So I think that's such a great point. But as we move in the journey, I'm sure, like, Joan, you've mentioned this so many times in our conversation, I'm sure there were many, many lessons for, that one, charging by the hour, charging by the photo, there's so many lessons. So were there any big mistakes or any big lessons that came out and you're like, no, never doing this, not in this life? Was there any big thing that has really struck you from a pricing point of view so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that became abundantly clear to me is there was a lot of my early clients who I was not charging much for. I was definitely not charging enough for. And it's this thing of like, well, we hang on to them for longer than we should, or we don't necessarily hang on to them, but we don't have that pricing conversation with them to say, hey, I'm increasing my prices, because we're just afraid, right? We're afraid we're going to lose them. But for me, I just never want to be in a position that resentment starts to build up, because that happens, right? Like, you're doing this work for somebody, and people like us, like, we can't help but want to still put our heart and soul into that work, even if we're not being well paid for it. Cause like, we can't help it. Like, I love taking beautiful pictures. And so whether you're paying me these or you're paying me hundreds of thousands, like, I'm still going to put a lot of effort into that. And so what happens over time is, as you continue to do that for somebody, you start to get resentful. And then that's just never a good place. And that's also not going to allow you to go above and beyond and to really delight them. And so I want to change people's perception of generosity. We think that it's a generous act to discount our work, but I would say it's actually more generous to charge appropriately, so that you can, in the process, go absolutely above and beyond and all out and absolutely make their day. That is a more generous act, because then you are on the line to do that, because you can kind of say, oh, well, what were they expecting? They weren't paying that much. I didn't have to bring my full, amazingness. And so I just kind of say, no, you got to charge more so that you can do more. That's to me what was a really big shift in my mentality. And, there's going to be people who you were under. I don't know any photographer who didn't start with charging a couple $100 for photos, right? Like, I think everybody at some point has done that. And so some of those folks will go with you, and some of those folks will continue on the journey and will understand. And it'll be like, there's been times too, I even think about like the video editor who edits my YouTube videos. We've been working together for like 2.5 years now. And he raised my rates not so long ago. And I was like, I'm glad you did, because I said, I felt like I wasn't paying you enough anyway. So, what client is ever going to tell somebody like, oh, you should charge me more? Like, they're never going to, maybe it happened somewhere, but I was like, oh, I didn't tell him that. Maybe he's going to listen to this and he'll go, I should have been charging her more from the get-go. But anyway, like, it's just one of these things of, you don't know until you ask, and people understand. And especially in this day and age, when prices are through the roof and the economic climate that we're in, and things just continue to get more expensive. And two, as your skills grow and you bring more offering and things like that. So I think if there was one thing that I would have wished that I had done earlier, is it would have been to have the courage to raise those rates, so that I wouldn't have hung on to that resentment so long. And it would have really prevented me from stalling out for as long as I did. It took me a good long time. Like, it started in 2015, and it really wasn't until about 2020 that it was
Oh,
like,
wow.
oh, now we see. I mean, I was making it work, but suddenly like 2019, 2020, that's when suddenly it was like, oh, now we're turbocharged because like
Hmm.
that's where that confidence level rose. And that's where I had really good systems in place and knew what was going on. And so that's where it kind of, yeah, blew the lid off things.
Yeah. Oh, that resonates so much with me. So when I was starting out, I had a mentor in town and he was a commercial food photographer. And I learned so much from him. So I often went back to him with questions. And I still remember I asked him, what should I price? I'm setting out, what should I charge? And he gave me this like a, I would say a very mediocre number.
Yeah.
And he said something like $1,200, that you should charge something like $1,000 or $1,200 for a full day shoot, because if you charge what I charge, you're not going to get any projects. Imagine a person who's just setting out into the market, who is
Mm.
anyway building confidence, and to know that, oh, if you ask for more than this, you're not going to get any projects. It
Oh,
just,
that's hard.
it was a punch in my face. But there was a lot of fear that was built in with that one statement. And I thought that I can never charge more than that. And so I did start off with that. And I realized that I very quickly was beginning to feel like I was putting in my best, exactly what you said, doing so much work, and I was not getting the joy out of it. And it was just, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And that was just setting in so quickly that I
Yeah.
immediately, I raised and I realized it works even better. I'm getting better clients. They believe, they've seen the work. And I did that for a bit and I know exactly what you're talking about. It's the worst. So I think it's so important to be comfortable with the rate that you put out, whether you think,
Mhm.
sometimes it doesn't even matter what someone else is putting out. You have to be so secure and so comfortable with it that you don't feel like, oh man, I didn't get paid enough. It's not worth it.
Right.
It should never do that to you, especially because photography is our love, our joy, right?
It is. And it's art, And so who's to say what you should be charging? Because that's the thing, kind of what you were saying is there is a certain amount of knowing kind of what other people are doing can be helpful. But also at a certain point, I kind of go, I don't care. Because here's the thing, like I think so many folks approach this as like such a narrow opportunity. And I'm like, oh, you don't even know. You don't even know. There is so much. There's so much demand. There's so much need. Like it's really opening up your mind to realize, yeah, there's going to be just like you don't want to be friends with everybody that's out there. You don't want to be working with everybody that's out there, right? Like, not every opportunity is a future client, right? It's as much about
Absolutely.
disqualifying people as it is qualifying people. So, to try to cater to what other people are doing, I 100 agree with what you're saying. Is like you stake your claim in the ground and say, this is what I'm charging, and I don't know what other people are doing,
Hmm.
but good for them. But this is what I need because I also know what's my overhead, what's going to make me excited. Like you said, like when I'm being well paid for something, I
Yep.
am there. I am 100%. I am invested and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this awesome.
Absolutely. So you talked about, I just love your story about your video editor. That's amazing. My
Mhm.
Pinterest manager did the same and she's been working with me for so long. And I was like, you should have said this earlier. And she was giving me all these justifications. I was like, you should not have to justify. But how do we do that? How does this translate to us, Shoni? Like, how
Mhm.
have you been able to go to your long-term loyal clients and say that you're increasing your rates? How have you done that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a straightforward conversation, right? Like this is just business. I think the tendency can be to, think that it's a lot more serious and dramatic than it is, but you do have to be ready to take that risk because I think that having that conversation with a past client, it's not about having some sort of magical statement that's suddenly gonna, have them go, oh, I've seen it now. I've seen the light, and yes, I'm gonna pay you more. Like, yeah, it's reality. Like certain clients will be like, yeah, I just can't afford that. And it's like, that's okay. And so now we're gonna go our separate ways, but like let's keep in touch. And because you also never know 5 years down the
Mhm.
line where that person's gonna land, what friends they have. Like they're gonna respect you for holding your ground.
Mhm.
So I think it's not about coming in and being adversarial. It's a non-dramatic conversation. Like, hey, here's how it is. I'm raising my rates, and whether that's a regular client and you're saying, hey, as of March 1st, my rates are going to increase to this, based on what we've been doing in past projects. Or if it's a past client that's coming around for new work and you say, I'm just going to give you a heads up, my prices have changed since we last worked together. And I want you might be surprised. It might even be shocking. And so I just want to prepare you for that. And let's have a conversation about it. Right. And most people will be really understanding of that. And if they can't join you on that journey, then that is totally okay, because it's not about you trying to save I feel like people just like hang on to every little last shred of opportunity. And I go, it's like, what's the saying? It's like you're tripping over dollars to grasp at pennies, right? It's like, you're just like hanging on to this penny. And I'm like, there are dollars all right around here. Like, let go. It's okay. Let it go. There's so much other opportunity waiting, and you're not going to be able to see it if you are so fixated on these low pay clients. So give them the opportunity. And if they don't follow, that's okay. There's a lot of fish in that sea.
Yeah. And the right clients they always understand. I have this amazing client. I've been working with her for years, and they're a big brand. And I still remember I walked up to her. I was like shaking. I need to have this very awkward conversation. And she was totally cool about it. And before I could even tell her why I'm increasing my rate, she's like, yeah, why don't you just send us an email and write blah, 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 blah. And she gave me exactly what to write so she could go back to her team and justify the increase in rate. So she told me exactly what to put in. And she was like, yeah, no problem. So I think the right clients who value you will always, always kind of support, because they do the same with their products, with their services. So they get it.
Well, and you know what I love about that is like, what's obvious in that is that this is you're a friend with this person, right? And this is a wonderful human being to work with. And it's like, I think that sometimes we make clients out to be these big, scary people, or that they're not understanding. I'm like, no, they are fellow human beings. And our job is to hopefully find the humans that are really fun to work with and value what we do. And clients are not as scary as I think a lot of times we make them out to be. And they're just as wonderful as anybody else. They're just human beings. They put their pants on the same way the rest of us do. So
some do.
Yeah, everybody's got their thing. So it's good.
But all right, so let's talk about value. All right, Joanie, we've been talking about, they see the value, they see the value, they see the value. But there are so many clients who actually come back and they'll be like, you know what? I mean, this is too high. This is this. And they try to negotiate your rates, and they'll try to bring it down, and they'll try to justify why your numbers don't make sense. At that point, instead of bringing down your numbers, how do you really show them the value and what you're bringing to the table? How do you deal with those situations?
I guess my opinion is, if somebody is really taking it to the, really trying to nickel and dime, certainly when I put together an estimate, I'm always thinking about how can I add some extra to this to know that there is room to negotiate down. Because if you start at your best price, like, this is my bottom line, and that's what you're giving straight out the gate, like, you got nowhere to go. But like, if you aim a little bit higher and you put some extra stuff in there that maybe they don't need, or other, or maybe you're okay taking away, then if they come back and they want to bring the price down, then okay, we can do that. And then they're going to feel like they've won, and that's great. But, if somebody is really pressuring me to reduce prices to a place where I'm not comfortable with, or I know that I can't do this profitably, like, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I don't want to do work that is not going to enable me to do my best work. Like, if somebody's like, oh no, can we just take this food stylist off? I go, well, no, because I just really need a food stylist. Like, that's just how I work. And if you don't like it, then there's plenty of other photographers who don't. And so go for it, So I feel like I'm not going to strong arm anybody into, if their budget is not there. Key example was, there was a cookbook opportunity that came my way, and I got on a call with them, and super nice people, super wonderful. But, when we started talking about budget, and they said, well, the last photographer we worked with charged $100 a recipe. And I was like, for ingredients? And they're like, no, for like everything. I was like, oh, yeah, no, I said, unfortunately, I'm well above that. Like, it's usually at least like for an all-in cookbook, and we're doing the cooking and the styling, like $750 is sort of like bottom line, and up, depending on exactly what we're doing. And I said, so I don't see how we're going to be able to meet in the middle on that, like $100 recipe versus 750. Like, I just don't see that we're going to be able to meet in the middle. And he's like, oh yeah, no, we would love to work with you, but yeah, we're just not going to be able to make that work and come close to that. I was like, totally understandable. And so we left on good terms, and, we didn't work together, and my heart's out to whatever photographer did take that job at $100 a recipe, because it was also like some really hard food that I was like,
oh, wow,
that was going to be a beast. But anyway, so yeah, I feel like it's having that confidence to know that, we're not here to get, like, if I'm winning 100% of the business that's landing on my desk, I'm definitely not charging enough, right? Like, if I'm at the 60 to 70% range, then I know I'm in a good place, because then I know I'm high enough that, there's definitely going to be people who are like, yeah, that's just too high. But, we're not so far that we're losing every deal that ends up in our lap. So that's kind of like that happy medium, I think. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that too, though, really helping somebody through the discovery process of asking those good questions to understand what their project is. Because, there are definitely photographers who don't know to ask the right questions and don't know how to have those conversations. And so then, they're kind of like, oh, this person really knows what they're talking about. Like, we're getting into the details, and let's start talking about your shoot. And like, they can feel that sense of confidence that they are in good hands. So that is definitely something that I think is important to develop, as well as developing that relationship. But then also really understanding, like, how are we helping this person? Because it's more that, like, we don't sell pretty photos. Like, that's not our job. Our job is to help people in building their business and growing their business and solving marketing problems and solving business problems. And so how do I understand where they're at and what are they trying to achieve? Because suddenly, if they can go from, instead of seeing my photos as just stuff to post on Instagram, but now they're seeing my photos as a way to reach more people and sell more product, that's worth paying more for. And that's something to develop then, in terms of in those conversations prior to sending an estimate, is understanding, like, what are we really doing here, and what are you hoping to accomplish, and what would be a positive outcome from this? What are you hoping to do? And I'll put myself on the line on this. There's a client who I do TikTok and Reels work for, and the very first time we worked together, we were in the kind of conversations together, and my price was higher than what they wanted to spend. And I said, well, what if I could tell you, though, you're really wanting to place here, and, we know kind of where you're at in terms of your Instagram Reels and your reach. And I said, what if I could tell you, though, and give you a certain amount of confidence and put my money where my mouth is, that if we do these videos together, you will see an increase? Like, how much value is there to you to see that? And they're like, well, that would be amazing, right? And so being able to really quantify, now that is a little like ballsy to say, I can help you increase your Instagram reach if we make some videos together. I also knew what was already on their Instagram, and I'm like, yeah, I already know, like, we can do some videos together, and for sure, like, maybe we're not going to go viral, but we're going to definitely move the needle from where they're at. I felt confident enough in that. And I said, so let's take a risk. Let's see if that's true. And, we don't have to do this for a long time. We can do this, like, let's just do a couple videos together as a test, and it'll be well worth the investment, especially if the numbers do move. And sure enough, the numbers moved, and they're like, all right, let's do it. I'm like, great. So, really understanding what business problems are we solving for somebody, and then suddenly the price is no longer as much of a problem, because they're assigning that price. They're spending that money to make that money elsewhere, because you don't spend money to make money, right? Like, are you willing to spend $3,000 a video to know that that's going to ultimately result in this much more reach on Instagram, which they know what those conversion ratios are of, we are able to reach these many people on social, and here's now what that puts into our bank account. Like, bigger companies who have that ad strategy, they know what that looks like. And so, being able to really understand how we're helping people.
Yeah. And I think I just love your tip of just telling somebody that, let's just try it out for a month. It immediately takes away that pressure. Exactly. It takes away the pressure. They are willing to, 1 month is how much investment? Like, they're willing to take that. And when they really see results, and let's say that the numbers didn't even grow, they really see the quality of, what you're bringing. It elevates their brand, and they're they kind of like it, so they're willing to go a little bit more. So I love that tip. I think just taking off that pressure from them of a long-term commitment and just putting in, let's try a little bit. Love it.
Yeah. And even if it's not like a regular thing, you can even make it like, okay, well, let's not maybe do all 10 photos. Let's just do 2, right? Like, let's just do 2 recipes and see where that goes. Like, here's your little taste tester. And like, well, you're going to pay me for this, but like, let's do it on a smaller scale so that the risk is less.
Yeah. And Joanie, I want to talk about something that's very common and yet not preferable, and that is working at no charge. So there are different situations where photographers tend to work at no charge, and someone's done this at some point in their careers, So some folks, they just want to get experience when they are beginning, and they would go to a restaurant and shoot, and there's no pressure of performance. So they just get experience and they don't charge any money for it. The second scenario could be if they have a big brand that's coming and they really want to work with them, and they're like, I'm just going to do it because I want their name on my portfolio. So they go ahead. And the third one is kind of like in exchange for a product that you're not really getting paid in money, but in product. But it's kind of, you're still working at no charge, right? What do you feel about this arrangement?
Yeah. So, I think for me, I think there are strategic and smart reasons to do work for free in certain circumstances. I think when you are brand new getting started and you're like, I came in with the fortunate position that I had spent time in restaurants in my previous work experience, that I knew how a restaurant environment worked. And so that was not as intimidating. But for somebody who's like, I think I want to do restaurant work, but I don't know the first thing about restaurants. Well, then great. But don't approach it as, hey, I'm going to do this work for free. I would approach it from the standpoint of, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to do maybe, and you got to put a limit on this. You can't just do this forever. You say, I'm going to do maybe 3 of these, right? And you're going to reach out to 3 different restaurants and say, hey, I am working on a special project, as if this is something that has that value to you, right? Like, I'm doing this special project and I need photos. And I was wondering if in exchange for you providing the food and working with me on this and spending time together, if then I'd be happy to provide the images to you for your use. And again, we're not doing like a whole day's photo shoot. We're doing maybe like 2 or 3 dishes, right? Like, keep this simple, keep it small, keep it manageable. And then that's first of all, some good networking. That's some good connections. And then that's good experience. And then you put that in your portfolio, and that can then be a great way to go, right? And you can leverage that then too for networking. But I think it's important to put a cap on that, and that's really sort of like a beginning thing. That being said, there are still times though that I will. So for example, I'll be like, oh, you know what? I really would like right now. I've been like, I haven't done anything about this, but I'm like, it'd be super fun to do some of the like more high-end restaurants in town, like white tablecloth, fine dining. I was like, I don't have a lot of that work in my portfolio, and I just would love to get a handful of those. And there's some chefs in town that I'm like, I would just pitch them and say, hey, can you set up, like, we'll do like 2 or 3 dishes. I'll come in, I'll shoot them. I'll be happy to give you the photos if you don't mind doing that work for me. Right. So it's like it's more of a creative collaboration at that point, as opposed to working for free. But I think that if somebody, the cardinal rule, I guess, sort of like taking it to that other extreme of like, a brand reaches out and says, we want these very specific parameters of these very specific things, like as if they are presenting to you a brief and saying, we want 3 photos and you to do these things with them. And here's how they're going to look, right? Like, they're effectively giving you all the details. Then I go, oh, no, thank you. Like, because now first of all, they've taken away my ability to be generous. They have now come in with expectations of what this is going to look like. I don't want any part of that, right? That kind of response, I'll just come back with, I'll play ignorant, I'll play dumb and go, oh, thanks so much for reaching out. I'd love to get on a call and talk about what you're looking for, and I can provide a price for what you're looking for. And then, maybe they disappear, and that's totally fine. So I think it's about that expectation is a huge piece of it for me. The other thing is, what was the second scenario you shared?
So there was one where you work for free just for experience. The second one is it's a big name and you want them in your portfolio.
I mean, I would not be above that.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely, I think it's like the role of editorial work, right? Like, you think about, if Bon Appetit magazine calls me tomorrow and says, Joanie, we need you in New York and we want you to photograph this thing, I'll be like, where you want me, where are we going? Let's do it, right? Because to me, yes, the majority of the time, like we want to make our money and things like that. But thinking of like, well, but there are some really big upsides to those strategic partnerships. And again, I'm not necessarily looking for like all this outward exposure, but what's that going to get me? Well, that's going to, yes, get me some notoriety. That's going to get me, I'm going to be able to put those tear sheets in my portfolio. I'm going to be able to put that logo on my website. And then two, even more so than that, that's going to get me some connections to some really important people who know other important people. Like that's going to get me in a pond that I don't usually fish in. And so I think there's the strategy. But anytime somebody comes to me with, here's an opportunity for exposure, and we're like, yes, exposure does not pay my rent. It's not about exposure. To me, it's about connections and networking. But there's also a very select few brands, companies, publications that would be in that realm, in my opinion. Like there's not a ton of folks out there. And also too, I think about like, what's that time going to take? You know, it's like somebody coming and saying, oh, this is a great opportunity to come shoot my cookbook for free. Well, oh, that's like how much time, right? Yeah. That's going to be more than a couple hours, but like, am I willing to part with 2 hours in the interest of some really awesome marketing opportunity? Absolutely. You know, so I think that it's really being able to weigh where that value is and what the opportunities are, but really also the opportunity cost.
And I think it's so important to kind of just be a little bit selfish about this, because if you're going to put out your services for free or at no charge, then you kind of have to see what value is it bringing to you. Is it in terms of experience? Is it in terms of name? Is it in terms of network? You know, where is it really adding value for you to be able to put your foot there, right? Amazing.
Yes, there's not an infinite number of those things. It's more of a select group. And it'd have to be very clear. If there's any shred of doubt that there's value there, that's when you run the other way and say, nope, I'm good. But if you're like, OMG, yes, that is awesome. And that would be fun. I mean, that's the other thing too. Sometimes you're like, that would just be really fun. Let's go do that.
You know? Like an experience, right? That's the experience. You're building something out of it. Wow. Amazing, Joanie. We've had such a brilliant conversation. We've taken the entire journey of where you start out. How do you know what's right or wrong? What are the challenges that come through? How do you price? How do you create that quote? How do you talk to long-term clients? How do you negotiate? And when do you work for free? When do you not work for free? It's been so amazing. I want to end our conversation today, you know, with something encouraging and a bit uplifting and inspiring, which you are such a master at. So I want to ask you one last question. And that is, you know, we all know that you really started your business from scratch. You built it from nothing. And you've taken these leaps of faith. You've taken bold decisions. You've done things that were scary. And you have built something that's profitable in the end. So can you leave us with like 1 or 2 of your solid tips how to build a profitable food photography business?
Yeah. You know, it is, you say that point that is so true, that there's been some pretty significant leaps of faith in my, you know, history of building my business. And it's every time that I've taken a scary leap that I go, I don't know if the ground is going to rise to this leap, right? Like, or if I'm going to sink or if I'm going to swim. But there's been some really key moments that I have done that. You know, the first one, leaving my solid job and saying, I'm just going to jump out of here and I'm going to go figure out how to run a creative business. And I don't even know what it looks like, but we're going to do that. I mean, that was so wild. I still don't entirely know how I did that, but I did. And then like second leap of faith was then in early summer 2017, right before I started the Bite Shot, we had an opportunity to move to the home where we are now, which is where the studio is. And that was a crazy leap, but it was also we see this potential for building something that we don't even totally know what it is. I mean, at that point, I didn't have the Bite Shot in mind, but I knew that we needed space. And I knew that like there was like these inklings. And so we took this really scary leap, and oh my gosh, it was stressful and it was nail biting and tears and prayers and all the things. But then, you know, it was like, oh, okay, we survived that. And then this past year has been yet another one of these really scary, intense leaps of faith. And I would be lying if I said it's been all, you know, roses and butterflies. It has not. It's been a lot of like, oh gosh, what am I doing? Why am I investing my life savings into building something bigger and better? And because there's this vision and there's this inkling that this is the direction I'm supposed to go. And on paper, this might look totally crazy, like, but my CPA says we're okay. So I'm also like, okay, if the CPA is happy, then I'm happy. But it's those scary leaps of faith. And I think that that's what a lot of times keeps people from moving forward, is feeling like there's so much mental training in us to resist risk and to want to stay comfortable. But if you are comfortable, you are not growing. Like, you're just living the same life, right? Like, if you want to get to another place where you currently are not, you got to get some super uncomfortable. You got to take some scary moves, and there's probably going to be some tears, and there's going to probably be some frustrations and some sleepless nights. But, you take those leaps, and then suddenly you kind of get to this place and go, okay, first of all, I'm still alive, right? Like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And you got to be willing to take that risk and the consequences of what that risk entail. But every time it's sort of having that faith. And so it is, as much as I'd love to say to somebody, like, follow these steps, and it's as much about stepping out on faith and not having an indication. Like, you won't know if it's going to work out. You won't have it. There's no guarantees. But I think that if you are leading from a place of fear, like if you are operating out of fear, that's never going to be a productive place. Like, if you can kind of check in with yourself and go, okay, I'm doing these things because I'm afraid. And you go, okay, well, I'm afraid, and that's okay. And I'm going to go and I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to leave, because what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
And I think in line with that, then too, the other thing that has really proven valuable to me is every time in that process is continuing to be generous and continuing to give and to provide value to other people, even when the bank account is not reflecting that, in a sense, is taking good care of people, being a good steward with what you do have. But generosity in the long term always returns. It's kind of this idea of you putting a certain amount of positive energy out into the world, and it's as if you're in a room that's got all these walls, and that energy, it's just going to bounce right back at you. So I just always imagine, like, I'm not being generous to manipulate people into being nice to me. No, I have this faith that if I put the good stuff out there, it's just going to bounce right back off the walls of the universe and come bouncing right back into my court. So that has also proven really positive. But you got to resist the fear, because the fear is going to tell you, no, just hang on, just be comfortable, be safe, stay in your box, don't do that, right? But now you just go, okay, I'm just going to let it all out there, and there's this amazing way that it just kind of continues to come on back.
Wow, I just love it. I just love that I'm talking about profitable photography business, and there you are. You're like, go jump off that cliff, take that leap of faith, don't be fearful. And the whole point about manifestation, I just absolutely love it. What you put out is actually what you're putting out for yourself. So if you're being generous, if you're being positive, then that's exactly what's boomeranging back to you.
Yes. Oh, I like that boomeranging. Yes, it is. It's like, whoa, where'd that come from?
You're putting out exactly that, Joanie. That's how I've seen you over the years. That's how I felt talking to you right now. You always show up in the most genuine, authentic, in your true self, being vulnerable many a times. And right now, we could really sense that you are so generous in sharing your knowledge as well. So this is a touchy topic. This is a very, forbidden topic. Not everybody goes and is open about it. And you were totally that person. Joanie, before you go, everybody in the world knows you. But if you can still just share your social media handles, and if you have a call to action for our listeners, that would be wonderful as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can find me over at The Bite Shot on Instagram and YouTube as well, youtube.com/The Bite Shot. But otherwise, all roads lead back to our homepage at thebiteshot.com, which actually, as of yesterday, got a brand new makeover. She is gorgeous, 4 months in the making. So everybody go check out the website, if only just to ooh and ah at all the hard work that the team here has been putting in. But yeah, that's what we're up to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joanie, for being here. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge, your wisdom, your vibrant, your radiant smile with us, and for lighting up our day and our podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So that was Joanie, and wasn't she just incredible? I mean, there's a reason why she's one of my favorite food photographers. She's brilliant at photography. She's brilliant in her business, but look at the amount of knowledge that she openly shares. You go to her YouTube, you go to her TikTok, you go to her Instagram. She is a wealth of knowledge. And I just absolutely love how practical she was in sharing, all of this information about pricing. The one thing that really stops us, overwhelms us, makes us question, and really at sometimes even beats our confidence. And she was so open and generous and really, showing, hey, here's how you do, here's how you start, here's how you move forward, here's the lesson that you learn, here's how you learn your lesson, right? Here's how you undercharge, here's how you overcharge, here's what not to do. All the lessons that she learned along the way, all the experiences she had, all the leaps of faith she took, and all the times that she was fearless and she moved forward. So money has a lot to do with your mindset as well. It has a lot to do with confidence as well. So make sure that those two are working hand in hand as you're building your business, as you're approaching clients. And remember that value is everything, like really value of your photos to your clients, value of that project to you, value, value, value. Always bring the conversation back to value. All right. Now, was that valuable to you or not? All right. So if you had fun in this episode, if you learned something, if it inspired you to take that leap, increase your rates, negotiate with your client, find your first job, go work for free, whatever and however it helped you take that step, then please let me know. Drop me an email at hello@myfoodlens.com or send me a DM on Instagram at Dutama_myfoodlens. I love to hear about your successes, your stories, and I love to share them as well. So send me that DM, send me that email. I'll catch you next time with another episode. Until then, bye-bye.